think it's just incredibly awesome that you joined us here today at Church on the Rock, because today marks the start of Pastor Rodger's brand new series, 50 Shades of Jesus. Now, throughout this entire series, Pastor Rodger is going to be looking at a couple of different character traits of Jesus and what he's done throughout his life. So you might want to grab a notepad and take some notes while you're looking through the podcast, and check out all the other podcasts on our website by just going to jesusistherock.org and clicking on the messages button. Now, while you're there, if you'd like to give to our ministries financially, you can easily do so by clicking on the giving button at the very top right-hand corner of the screen. Now, as we prepare for this message together, let us pray that God stirs life change into our hearts.
50 Shades of Jesus. We've been talking about the life of Jesus and how he lived and how he talked and how he walked. And because if you're not careful, if you get in this church, they'll show you this side of Jesus, and this denomination tells you about this side of Jesus. But Jesus was he had many faces, many sides of Jesus. And sometimes we just focus on one area. And that's why I've sort of done this series, is to look at Jesus from every situation. And we're going to see a side of Jesus this morning that you rarely ever see. Mark's Gospel, chapter 14, verse 32 says, they came to an olive grove called Gethsemane. Now, this is about just a few days before Jesus would go to Calvary and die on the cross. They came to an olive grove called Gethsemane, and Jesus said, sit here while I go and pray. He took Peter, James, and John with him and began to be filled with horror and deep distress. And he told them, my soul is crushed with grief to the point of death. Stay here and watch with me. And he went on a little farther, and he fell face down on the ground. He prayed that if it were possible, the awful hour awaiting him might pass by him. Abba, Father, he said, everything is possible for you. Please take this cup of suffering away from me. Yet I want your will and not mine. Then he returned and found the disciples asleep. Simon, he said to Peter, are you asleep? Seriously? Couldn't you stay awake and watch with me even 1 hour? Keep alert and pray, otherwise temptation will overpower you. For though the spirit is willing enough, the body is weak. Then Jesus left them again and prayed, repeating his pleadings. Again, he returned to them and found them sleeping, for they just couldn't keep their eyes open, and they didn't know what to say. When he returned to them the third time, he said, still sleeping? Still resting? Well, enough. The time has come. I, the Son of Man, am betrayed into the hands of sinners. Get up. Let's be going. You see, my betrayer is here. The Garden of Gethsemane. The word Gethsemane actually means olive press. Geth means to press. Semene means olive. So Gethsemane means olive press. So this garden was more than likely a place where the olives would be pressed and crushed in order to make the precious olive oil that they would use to anoint and they would use for different things. Or maybe grapes would be pressed there and made into wine. It was a place of pressing, of crushing, of breaking. And so that started me to thinking, because I remember Jesus kneeling here begging his Father, if there's any other way to save the world, if there's any other way to save mankind, I don't want to be whipped and beaten and spit upon and stripped naked and mocked and laughed at and hung on a cross to die. If there's any other way, let's do it that way. In one place, the Bible tells us that his sweat actually became as drops of blood. I can't even comprehend that. I don't even know what that means, but I do know one thing, that's stress. When you've been in a situation that your sweat is like drops of blood, where it feels like there's no way out. I don't want to face this. I don't know what to do. We see it today. Many people take their own lives. They put a gun to their head, or they hang themselves, or they do something because there's no way out. That's pressure. That's stress. That's life closing in, and I don't know what to do. Jesus was there. The Bible said there's no temptation taking you, but such is common to man. Jesus felt that. He felt that pain, and now his sweat is like drops of blood. And this is when the Holy Spirit really began speaking to me about this. And my thought was, I've never seen this side of Jesus before. I've never seen Jesus like this. I've never seen him agonizing and feeling stressed and feeling pressed. I mean, Jesus is always the voice of reason. He's the epitome of power and control. I mean, yeah, he would get angry and go in the temple and throw chairs and kick over tables and whip folks that are acting crazy in church. He would get angry, and on occasion he would break down and weep. In one place it said he stood on a mountainside and he looked out over Jerusalem and said, Jerusalem, Jerusalem, how often I would have gathered you together and you would not. I wanted to bless you and you wouldn't let me. I mean, and it said he wept over Jerusalem. He wept at when his friend Lazarus had died. He wept. He was emotional. He was very passionate about what he did, but not this way. Not with an agonizing, almost fear of what's to come. I mean, there was things he loved lost people. He was so passionate about lost people. He was always hanging around lost people. Today, sometimes we don't even like to get around lost people because we're afraid of what somebody might say about us. If we're seen over here, if we're seen talking to this person, what are they going to think about me? If I'm over here and I'm hanging out at a center party, what's somebody going to say about me? Listen, I decided a long time ago, people are going to talk about you if you do or talk about you if you don't, so you may as well just go ahead and do it. Just go ahead and let your light so shine before men that they may see your good works and glorify the Father which is in heaven. He said, don't hide your light under a bushel. Go minister. Don't be afraid to minister to lost people. People are probably going to talk about you. They talked about him. They called him a wine bibber and a glutton and a friend of sinners and everything else, but it didn't stop him because he was passionate about lost people. Jesus never backed away from lost people. But this is different. Jesus is always a picture of power under control. Power under control. He was the original Cool Hand Luke. I'm showing my age. Some of you don't know who Cool Hand Luke is, do you? He was way back in the 1900s. 1967, Paul Newman came out as Cool Hand Luke. Power under control. He always handled situations with calmly and with class and dignity and charisma and grace. Lawyers and scholars would try and trip him up with crazy questions, and he would just boomerang them back in his face. You remember, this will show age a little bit again, but some of you remember because it hadn't been too long ago, one of the deodorant commercials said, never let them see you sweat. That was Jesus. He never let them see him sweat. He was always under control. Now he's not just sweating, his sweat's like drops of blood. This is different. This is different. I mean, again, I think in pictures. That's the way when I read the Bible and I think in pictures, and so don't get all bent out of shape with my illustration here. But I mean, when I see Jesus most of the time, it's like Clint Eastwood. I read the Bible and I hear doo-doo-doo. You know the music Clint Eastwood has? That's how I see him, Go ahead, make my day. You feel lucky, punk? That's Jesus. He's just so under control. Remember when they drugged the little woman out and threw her down at his feet and said, we caught her in the very act of adultery. Now Moses' law says you should stone her. What are you going to do? Yeah. He just reaches down and starts writing in the sand with his finger. Doesn't say a word. And they're all backing off because whatever he's writing, they don't like. And he stands up. I can just see him stand up, and they all sort of, jump back. And he says, "You're right, let's stone her. And whichever one of you is without sin, you cast the first stone." Doo-doo-doo. And it said they all just dropped their rocks and went on home. He's power under control. He's power. That's how we find him all through the New Testament. He walked up to a fig tree one time, and it said he was hungry, and he started to get figs, and there was no figs. There was just leaves and branches. And he starts cussing out the tree. He cursed the tree. He said, "Never again will you bear fruit. From this day forward, never." And then he turns around and he walks off. Poor disciples, they must be thinking, "Oh my gosh, he's lost it. He's talking to trees." Till the next day. And they all walk out, and they walk by the tree, and the poor tree's dried up, withered up, and dying, just hanging there. The leaves have all fallen off of it, and they're like, "Gee." He's power under control. That's how we find him all the way through the New Testament. Never let them see him sweat until we get to Gethsemane, the olive press. And suddenly we're shown a picture of Jesus we've never seen before. He's not just sweating, he's sweating like drops of blood. And he takes the disciples with him, and at one point he tells most of them, he says, "Y'all stay here. This is about as far as you can go." And then he takes 3 with him, Peter, James, and John. He says, "Y'all come with me." I don't know about you. I want to be one of the 3. You know what I mean? I don't want to, there's just something. They couldn't go all the way with him, but it says they went a little further. I want to just go a little further than I am today. I want to go a little further than the crowd. I want to go I don't want to just be saved. I've told you before, I want to be so saved I can swing over hell on a rotten rope singing Amazing Grace. I want to be so saved. I want to go a little bit further. And they took them a little bit further. And then he said, "Sorry guys, this is the end of the line. The rest of it I got to go alone." And so he goes on to a place, and he begins to cry out to the Lord. And at the end of the road, at the Garden of Gethsemane, the olive press, we find Jesus. But this time, perhaps for the first time, we see a different Jesus. We see Jesus under pressure. We see him being pressed. And you can tell there's something different about him because he goes back and he finds his disciples asleep, and he sort of lashes out at them. "What are you doing? I'm going to the cross. I'm going to die tomorrow, and you're sleeping? Seriously? Wake up and pray. Don't you know you're going to be tempted? You need to be praying. It's raining, Maurice. You got to party. Pray. What are you doing sleeping? You need to pray. Have you looked at the forecast? Pray. What are you doing?" That's sort of what, and he says, this is life or death. You ever felt pressed on every side? You go to work and you're pressed. You go home and you're getting pressure at home. You go to church and there's pressure at church. You hang out with your friends and you're getting pressure from your friends. It's like everywhere I go, I'm getting pressed on every side. The bills are pressing. Sickness is pressing. Family's pressing. Friends are pressing. Enemies are pressing. And you find yourself at Gethsemane. Sometimes we find ourselves lashing out at people who aren't even responsible for our trouble. They just happen to be the closest ones around. We come in, we're yelling at our wife or our husband, or we're screaming at the kids and kicking the dog. Dog didn't do anything. We're just stressed. We're just pressed on every side. You feel like the life's being sucked out of you, joy's being sucked out of you. And I'm talking about people who normally have it all together, or at least they seem like they do, but they've come to a point where they've been pressed and pressed and pressed, and the oil and the joy of their life seems to be dripping out of their bodies, and we may even lash out at those closest to us. Or worse yet, shut them out. And Jesus screams, wake up, watch and pray so that you don't enter into temptation. What are you doing sleeping at a time like this? If I had time, I would take off on that. And I would deal with the question this morning, what are we doing sleeping at a time like this? When people are dying and going to hell. When people are sleeping in the park right across the street from us. When people are eating out of garbage cans. What are we doing sleeping? What are we doing? What are we doing? When we have opportunities to invite people and bring people in and to go out into the highways and hedges and compel them to come in, what are we doing? Sleeping. Why won't we wake up? But I don't have time to preach that. Jesus is stressed to the max. This is not the Jesus we've come to know. This is when you're a child and you look up and daddy's scared. You know what I mean? Daddy's always got it together. I may be scared, but daddy will take me in his arms. Daddy, and now daddy's frightened. Uh-oh, things are bad. When daddy's scared, it's when my hero is stressed. I mean, something's happened. This is Jesus. He's stressed. We've never seen him stressed. We've been on the boat with him in storms, and we're all crying out, and he's sleeping in the back of the boat. I mean, he's cool hand Lou. What happened? Now he's stressed. This has got to be bad. This is a bad day. Or is it? This can't be good. Or can it? And this is when I had my final thought on this. Listen to this. If you miss everything else, get this one sentence. Everything of any value must first be broken. Anything of any value must first be broken. Before we get the precious olive oil, the olive has to be pressed. Before we get the precious wine, the grape has to be crushed. Everybody loves it except for the grape. Before we get the flour, the grain has to be ground and crushed. Before we get the fruit, the seed has to die and be planted in the ground and be buried. And take it right on down the line. But before we get paper to make money and 1,000 other things, a tree has to die and be crushed and be ground up. Before we have metal to make automobiles and 1,000 other things, the steel has to be melted and molded and shaped. It has to be anything worth anything has to be broken. You even think about an egg. I don't care if you like it fried, scrambled, poached, boiled, whatever. Before you get to that egg, at some point that shell has to be broken. That outside hard shell, you know what I'm talking about. It has to be broken before you get to the egg, before you get to the inside. And so it was with Jesus. Even Jesus had to visit the garden. Even Jesus had to be crushed, had to be broken. The third and final time, as he walked back to his disciples, he was different. Suddenly, Cool Hand Luke was back. Clint Eastwood was back. He walks up to his disciples and he says, get on up. It's time to go. Mount up, boys. It's time to ride. My time has come. He's back. There's something different. Suddenly, he's like, I've got a feeling everything's going to be all right. Suddenly, something is happening. And listen to me. Yes, the crucifixion still came. Calvary still came. The spit in his face, the humiliation of being stripped, the nails in his hand, the crown of thorns, the spear in his side. And it was all as bad, if not worse, than he thought it would be. But something happened in the garden. Something happened that on the cross, now on the cross, he looks at this repentant sinner and he says, hey guy, don't worry about it. Today you'll be with me in paradise. Da-da-da. He's back. I mean, you kidding me? On the cross, he looks out. He's being whipped and beaten and spit on. And he looks out through the spit in his face and says, John, take care of mom, okay? Mom, You take care of John. You're going to need each other. What is this? He's worrying about John. He even looks at the people who are crucifying him and he says, Father, they don't know what they're doing. Don't hold this against them. He's back. He's back. No man can take my life, but I lay it down. 3 days later, I'm going to bring it back up again. Even death can't hold him down. Even this. Why? Because he's been to the garden. He's taken care of business even on the cross. This is pure Jesus, pure oil, pure wine, all because he was willing to go to Gethsemane and be crushed. He was wounded for our transgressions. He was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him. See, Jesus didn't have to go to Gethsemane. He chose to go there. He chose to be broken in the garden so he could be used on the cross. You didn't hear me. I said he chose to be broken in the garden so he could be used on the cross. Are we willing to go to the garden? Are we willing to be broken, to go through the breaking and the crushing and the pressure if we know God's just getting ready to use us to change the world? The cross changed everything. Maybe you're here this morning and you're feeling that pressure at work, home, bills, sickness, relationships. But the real problem is you're still trying to put on a brave face. You're still trying to handle it. Maybe you've even gotten bitter or cynical. And maybe you found yourself lashing out at your friends or your spouse or your kids or your enemies. And you're lashing out and you don't even know why you're lashing out. Listen, at some point you're going to have to be broken. At some point, you're going to have to submit to the olive press. To get to that egg, you're going to have to allow that hard shell to be broken. That's not to say you still won't suffer. Calvary may still come. Divorce may still come. Bankruptcy may still come. Sickness may still come. The loss of a loved one may still come. You may still go through hard times, but because you've been to Gethsemane, because you've allowed yourself to be broken, you'll handle it with a different attitude. I promise you, when you go through it, you'll go through it with a different attitude. You'll have a renewed spirit. Paul said, in my weakness, that's when I'm made strong. I was in my Gethsemane one time, one of my Gethsemanes. I've been there a few times. But a wise man named James Miller called me one day. I hardly knew him then, really. It was before he started attending church here. I just knew him casually. But he knew a little bit of my situation. And he called me out of the blue one day and he said, listen, pal, don't you let the enemy steal from you in the darkness what God has taught you in the light. You will live to rise again. And I never forgot that. Now, in about 2 minutes, we're going to cut it off. 3 groups of people that I'm speaking to today. For some of you, this may be your resurrection day, and I hope it is. You've been through the crushing, you've been through the breaking, you have been to Calvary, you've hung on, you've been there, and now it's time for you to rise up in victory and live in victory ever. For some of you, this is that day, and I thank God for that. This is your resurrection day. For others, you're on the cross, and you're hanging there, and some of you feel like you're hanging by a thread. I'm just hanging on. I mean, I'm barely hanging on. My word to you is keep hanging on, because resurrection's coming. You just keep hanging on. Tie a knot in it and hang on, because there's a new day coming. But the main group I want to talk to were those Cool Hand Lukes, those Clint Eastwoods, those John Waynes, those guys that I've got it and I can make it and I'm going to do it. Listen to me, at some point, you're going to have to find yourself in the Garden of Gethsemane. You're going to have to allow that self to be broken. Even Jesus had to go through it. You have to allow yourself to be broken. And you get to the point where you say, I don't want it, I don't like it, I hate it. Nevertheless, not my will, but thine be done. God, whatever you want, I surrender to you. It's a surrender, and it's a putting away pride. It's putting away my will and my way and my thoughts, and I got this, I can handle this. No, I can't handle this. Because when you get in the olive press, listen to me, whatever's inside of you comes out. You can fake it till you make it and smile and put on a brave face and a happy face, but when you get there, whatever's inside comes out. Good or bad, when you get pressed. Yeah, but people wouldn't understand. You're probably right. That's why Jesus left the crowds to go there. Yeah, but even my church wouldn't understand. People at work, they wouldn't understand. You may be right. That's why he left some of his disciples there. He said, you can't handle this. He only took 3. You say, yeah, but even my closest friends, even my wife, my husband, if they really knew, they wouldn't get it. You may be right. That's why he left the 3 there. And you may have to find yourself walking that last mile alone, just you and God, and saying, God, here I am. You know me already. You know my sin, my weakness, and I can't share it with anybody, but I got to share it with you. You find yourself broken in the garden, and I promise you, he can handle it. Because of Gethsemane, Jesus could handle Calvary. And because of Calvary, he would soon find out what it was like to rise again, to be resurrected. The song says, because he lives, I can face tomorrow. Some of you maybe just need to be broken today. It's time for you to travel to Gethsemane. Bring whoever you can bring with you, but at some point, you're going to have to surrender and say, not my will, but thine be done. I've tried my will, it didn't work. I've tried my way, and here I am. I've tried to be strong. I've tried to think it through, reason it through, work it through. I've done everything. I've tried to manipulate this, and I've tried to strategize, and nothing is working. I'm being pressed and pressed and pressed. And today, maybe what you need to do is just surrender. Put away your pride and say, that's it. I don't control the weather. You're in control. Whatever it does, whatever happens, not my will, but your will be done.
Again, thank you so much for joining us here today at Church on the Rock. If you would like to share how God is moving in your life, you have a prayer request, or just are seeking some answers, please don't hesitate to give us an email or look us up on our social websites. pray@jesusistherock.org. Now, if you would like to give to our ministries financially, you can easily do so by going to jesusistherock.org and clicking on the giving button at the very top right-hand corner of the screen. Have a wonderful day.